Startups are getting a chance to pitch their ideas and potentially get funding from some of the Valley's heavy hitter investors. Yahoo Finance's Melody Hahm is there with the latest. Melody?
Hey, Julie. Yeah, I had a chance to sit down with Admiral Mike Rogers. He's the former head of the NSA, and he did run the U.S. Cyber Command there. He did retire last year, so now he's speaking quite freely about his time with the Trump administration, and I want you to listen to our conversation. When you think about the vulnerabilities that still exist, of course, in the landscape, especially when you look at some of the juggernauts out there who perhaps it was an afterthought rather than a core part of the DNA of the company, do you feel like our country is at all safer than perhaps in 2016?
Well, I would say, look, there's a greater recognition of the challenges, and as I always said in the government, we can't solve anything if we don't acknowledge that there's an issue here. So the positive side is you get broad acknowledgement. The challenge continues to be the attacker generally has an easier job than the defender. There's not enough human capital to go around. It doesn't matter what size company, it doesn't matter if you're in the government, it doesn't matter if you're in the private sector. In my experience, the one common theme I hear from everybody, and I certainly felt this way in the government, I got to get more people, I got to get better people. How can I increase the human piece of my work to make it more capable, more resilient, to help me create a better cybersecurity strategy? That isn't going to change. I mean, I think we're fundamentally in an era where there's always going to be a mismatch between requirements and people. So part of this gets to be, how do you harness technology to maximize that human capital? That doesn't mean to replace it. It means, how do you ensure that human capital is really doing the things where it generates the most value?
Especially given the past couple of years and now looking ahead to the 2020 elections, what would you advise a lot of the startups and, established tech players out there to make sure they're doing their due diligence to ensure that there aren't foreign bad actors in
So
play?
a lot of times I'll hear, well, look, we're just starting our journey. We're so small, no one would care about us. And my comment is, well, in this hyper-connected world we're living in, that really doesn't exist as a rationale anymore. You look at NotPetya is a good example. The single greatest cyber incident we've ever had globally, arguably, June of 2017, starts with the Russians launching malware in the Ukraine designed to achieve an effect in the Ukraine. But because of the way they did it, it suddenly proliferates globally. None of those entities outside the Ukraine were the target. And yet, within 72 hours, we're dealing with something globally that results in impact that we're talking about tens to hundreds of billions of dollars. So the idea that somehow I'm not potentially impacted by what's going on in the broader environment, or I'm too small, or they wouldn't be interested in me, I would argue I would not build a strategy around that thought process.
And, we talked about startups and their approach to cybersecurity. I'm sure you've witnessed and talked to so many startups focusing on cybersecurity, right? And that's their business model. Right, do you feel as though that industry has been promising to you? Do you feel as though there are a lot of players there who are acting for good?
Right. So, one of the reasons I got involved in some of the things I'm doing in the private sector was I believe cybersecurity was a primary mission for me when I was the director of NSA and the commander of Cyber Command. It wasn't just a job, though. It was something I really believed in. It was something that I thought the private sector could play a huge role in, that it couldn't just be the government. And so as I stepped away from my 37 years as a naval officer, I thought to myself, so how can you try to make a difference in a new part of the world? And how can you try to build on your set of experiences? And early on, I decided I want cybersecurity to be one of my focus areas. And so as I watch this ecosystem from a different perspective now, the positive side is there's a lot of capability out there. I think there's a couple challenges, though. Number one, there is no single technology. There's no one single company. There's no one single group. There's no one single nation that has all the answers here. I continually run into people who say, well, we're just going to develop a technology that's going to make this all go away, right? It isn't going to be a problem anymore.
Yeah.
And I'm going, I don't think so. Number two, the solutions we're creating grow ever more complicated, and because there's no single solution, we're applying more and more capabilities. That's not a bad thing, but the flip side is, so how do you integrate all this? And at times I wonder, are we creating solutions that are so complicated that the reality is the majority of a company's IT, CIO, CISO, kind of key IT people, do they really understand the full breadth of the complexity and the second and third order potential associated with bringing so many dissimilar capabilities together? I worry about that a little bit.
You know, those were lots of existential questions that a 5-minute interview we couldn't necessarily unpack. But I do have to say, Mike Rogers was very impressive in his foray from the public sector to the private sector. Right now, he is the senior advisor at Team 8, which is the world's leading cybersecurity firm that's helping startups actually embed and integrate a lot of those tools from early on before you become the size of, let's say, Facebook. Back to you guys.
All right, Melody, thank you.
Hey investors, Zach Guzman here. Are you interested in learning more about the markets and getting the latest financial news? Well, then click right here to subscribe to our Yahoo Finance YouTube channel. Get the latest up-to-the-minute market analysis, big interviews in the world of finance, and information on how to manage your money every day wherever you are.